Buongiorno. You're listening to Going, where God is at work, a podcast where cross-cultural workers discuss everything from faith and fear to finances and faux pas. We're walking out our call to ministry in faraway places, and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Jesse Pauley, missions leader serving in Rome, and I'm here with Jenn Williamson, our missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. And we are missing yet again our friend and pastor Alessandro Di Leonardo in Cisterna di Latina. Good morning, Jenn.
Good morning, Jesse.
I was just thinking as I was introducing you that you're in Lyon, France. How is the Olympics, Summer Olympics being in France? Is that impacting your life at all? Harder to get flights or travel or?
No, it's not. The travel so far has not been impacted, but I will tell you, like every city is undergoing a major overhaul. So whole streets closed. They've been redoing our airport for already almost 2 years, and I know it's in prep for Olympics. So I'm anticipating it being completed soon. So it's like all of France is getting a facelift right now, and
Wow.
I think it's kind of a benefit for us in the long run, but it is like even just the simple daily tasks like walking my dog. Each month there's like a new part of a new bridge being redone, and I have to totally keep altering my route.
Yeah.
And we just found out one of our major roads, we live right in the middle of Old Lyon, and one of our major roads kind of out to the freeway, like our path to the airport or whatever, they're like, it's going to be closed from this spring till next summer. So that one, we're like, this can't be about the Olympics. Like, what until 2025? We're like, you're not picking a good time to do this. But everything else, we've been like, it seems like it's been getting ready. And we were kind of hoping there would be like a whole construction pause once we hit this summer. But apparently, that's
Are they
not the case.
building like new stadiums or anything, or is it using like existing stuff? Do you know?
And they might be I don't even think they are in Paris. I don't know. In Lyon, no. I know that they're using the existing stadium. We've bought tickets to 2 football or soccer for our American friends matches, Olympic soccer matches that are going to be played here in Lyon. David
Oh,
and I have
cool.
tickets. So we're going to see the men's semifinals and the
Okay.
women's bronze medal match, both of which
Oh,
are being played here.
fun. Oh,
I
that should be good.
know. Yeah,
Yeah, I
we're
always wonder
excited.
because like you see some of these like countries and cities where they build like all these stadiums for the Olympics or the World Cup, and then when it's gone, like the current sports community in that area doesn't fill them, doesn't use them, and a lot
Yeah,
of times they go
yeah.
unused. It's kind of sad, but
No,
that's
I think
exciting.
France is doing a good job of that, of really making use, and that's why it's called the Paris Olympics, but there are events in everywhere from Lille down to, I think some of the sailing events are in Marseille. So,
Awesome.
there are events being done all over France.
That's so cool. I'm really bummed because we live so close. You know, Italy and France are not far away, but I don't have any plans of getting up to see anything. So bummer.
Yeah, it's a bucket list item for me. So, David and I jumped on it to
That's
go
awesome.
to a couple matches. Yeah.
Well, we don't have Alessandro with us today, as I said in the intro, and we were just thinking about, while he's traveling and with some recent news that came out, we thought, well, this would be a good time to take a break from our usual working through your dissertation. And
Mhm.
so, the Lausanne Movement, I'm not pronouncing that right. You pronounce it better than me.
Lausanne.
Lausanne, yeah. Well, first of all, Jenn, will you explain to us what is the Lausanne Movement?
Yeah. The Lausanne Movement, it's named for the town where its members first met was in Lausanne, France, Lausanne, Switzerland, sorry. Lausanne, Switzerland, which isn't far from here.
Yeah, it's a border,
Um,
right? Or close to
yeah,
the
it's
border?
it's pretty close to the French-Swiss border. It was started actually by Billy Graham and a bunch of other Christian global leaders in 1974, and they really wanted to find better ways to collaborate and to have more strategic efforts to accelerate global missions. So it goes back to 1974, and about
Wow.
every, I think, 10 years, they do what they call congress, a global congress, and they're leading up to one that's going to be this year in the fall in Seoul, Korea. And
Okay.
so, in leading up to this, they prepared this huge global report on the state of the Great Commission with like over 150 authors. It's translated already into 7 languages. It's and it really, they really did survey and talk to people all around the globe to come up with this data.
It's so cool to see. I feel like sometimes we're a little slow in Christianity to get good reports or good statistics and information. So I really appreciate this. A few years ago, we were going through a similar thing that was done for the city of Rome, but it was
Hmm.
a secular piece done for where culture was going and things in Rome. It was I think it was called the Rome 2030
Hmm.
report, but
Okay.
the religious side, the Christianity side, was kind of missing. I mean, there's a little bit
Yeah.
about Catholicism, but not
Hmm.
much. So I'm excited to talk more about this
Yeah.
report.
Yeah. And it's really big. And in some ways, like one of the, if you go and watch it, we'll put a link in the show notes to Matthew Neerman's sort of summary of the report on the Lausanne website. But um, he says this is the most boring slide in the report because it looks like, for as long as we have any data shown, there have been 34% of the world has been Christian, which makes it seem like, we're not gaining any ground, not losing any ground. It's like the straight line. But then when you dig down and drill down into the different regions, you can see how, like, the global center of Christianity used to be primarily Northern, European and North American, white and
Hmm.
male. And he points out that right now, if we were to identify sort of the center of global Christianity, what does a typical Christian look like? It would probably be a Nigerian woman.
Yeah,
So the center of global Christianity has moved to Asia, South America, and Africa. And so the flat line of 34% globally seems like no change, but Christianity has just boomed and taken off in some places and is sort of on the decline in others.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I can. So we were at a conference in Birmingham in the UK last
Hmm.
year, and there was a moment where it kind of seemed you could kind of see this happening because here we were primarily white North American mission leaders meeting together. And at the same conference center, there was a
Yes.
retreat of Nigerian women. I'm pretty sure they were
Yes.
Nigerian, if I remember correctly. And they were
Yes.
took over the whole place. They had prayer pockets throughout the
They were
campus in the morning,
singing early in the morning. I woke
singing.
up to them
Oh,
singing worship songs. That was phenomenal. Yeah.
it was so cool. Yeah, it was interesting.
That's
When
a good
when I heard
picture.
him say that in the store, I was like, I saw this already. Like I
Yeah.
saw this physically.
Yep. That's so
But
true. Forgot about that.
very cool. So one of the interesting things about how they approached this report was that they approached it asking questions, right? Instead of
Well, they summarized it by the questions, which is what I thought
yeah.
was really interesting because you're going to gather data by asking questions, that's for sure. But at the end, they really said, one of their conclusions was the church is not prepared to answer the questions that the world is asking today.
Hmm.
And I agree with that assessment. I feel like the church in general and missionaries specifically can often come in thinking, I have the answer. Jesus is the answer. Here, let me tell you the answer. But we're not framing the answer in a way that responds to the questions that are being asked today. And he points out, while the truth of the gospel is unchanging, how people hear and receive the gospel changes, because the gospel is still going to respond to today's, what are the major needs and concerns and fears and doubts and challenges of today. The gospel will still respond to those. But if we're still presenting a gospel message that's responding to the questions of 50 or 100 years ago, we're going to miss our mark and miss the target. So yeah, so he frames basically what comes out of this are a bunch of trends and 10 questions that are shaping those trends. And like the two biggest, he says, are one is, what is a digital age? And the
Hmm.
second is, what does it mean to be human? And those are really big questions, both of which touch on things like AI. Um,
Well, the access to information that we have now because of the digital age and
exactly.
how easy it is for people to be connected,
Mhm.
globally.
Mhm.
It's interesting too to see on some of the graphs that they put, like, um, they divide it up by ages, and you could clearly see that, like, the younger generation, the generation that's been inundated with social media and um, technology, has changed their views to what traditionally was in that region of
Yeah.
the world. You know.
And even how we understand truth then at that point too, right? So there's so much there. Yeah, it was interesting to me to think of digital age because I think, gosh, we can think historically, Bronze Age, and much more, recent history, industrial age. And even I think I would say I grew up in a technological age, a technology age. But digital age is its own new thing with its own new
Hmm.
shape and characteristics. And yeah, it's I think an important question. What is the digital age?
Yeah, I mean, it's more, one of the things that they highlight in that section is how more and more people are um, using the internet, and more people are on the internet,
Right.
and all across the globe, like
Right.
everywhere. There's
Yeah.
no, and it's funny because I remember back to like the early days of like Facebook and stuff, and hearing people say like, "Oh, I'll never get on Facebook," and then now they're on Facebook, and then people that that might have been jumped on right away that are now getting off and have been there for a while, seeing. But it's just, yeah, it's consistent, the growth around the world and the impact of the digital age.
Yeah. So there's things because of the digital age too that trends that now can be experienced on a global level. Whereas, it used to be for most of human history, the fastest news could spread would be at the speed of a horse. And, so when we think of the last 150 years in terms of technological advancements and connectivity, now an event that happens anywhere in the world can have some level of impact everywhere in the world. That just wasn't true to 150 years ago or even 100 years ago in terms of how quickly the news could spread.
Yeah, we saw that in 2020. I mean, we saw people in Europe responding to what was happening in America with George Floyd's
Exactly.
death, and
Exactly.
all the time what's going on in right now in Ukraine and Russia, and Israel and Palestine. Like, all of those informations, you can
Yeah.
find 24-hour
And
news
interestingly
cycles
enough,
online.
it's strong opinions in places that aren't being impacted. So, I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but my sister was arrested last week at a Palestinian um, protest at the
Protest.
university where she works because her university is invested in a company that's supplying arms to Israel, basically. And I'm thinking it's interesting that the passion of an event that is, in some ways, has no direct impact on her life, right? Um, but
Hmm.
we feel passionately and connected to these things, and that to me is part of the digital age.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, yeah, I have a similar story from the George Floyd, where my brother was at a protest, and I found out about it, and there was a shooting right next to where he was at, like a block away. And yeah, it really messed with me, the fact that I could watch him live protesting and see
Yeah.
that is, but it's we're all connected, and so it really does change, and needs to change, I guess I should say, how we approach uh, sharing the gospel, sharing Jesus
And
with
think of the
people.
benefits of that because one of the things that I think we have such a privilege of as believers who live cross-culturally and work cross-culturally is when I walk into a church and I am literally with complete strangers, sometimes speaking a language I don't even understand, and immediately
Mm,
I recognize that we have something in common, something deep and profound that unites us, that's beyond our language or our culture. And so the universality of the gospel I've gotten to experience in places that are far flung, well, that can now be shared in a digital world in a way that I think gives so much strength and validation to the gospel message. It's one of the things that reassures me when I go to a church in South Africa or a church in Hong Kong or a church in, Portland, Oregon, and I know in all of those places, the same message of truth, of hope, of peace, of salvation is being preached. That is one of the that it resonates that broadly across all cultural lines and in all the languages. That even when I'm having doubts and questions, that convinces me that something here
Mm.
is real, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
influence and the impact globally is
right.
unmatched. Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting too. This trip that I just came off of in the States, we were speaking at a lot of different, settings, and one of the settings was a group um, at a church that's in a college town, and so it's a lot of young people there, and they're interested in. A group of them are doing I forget the name of it, but it's a whole thing, Bible study type thing that
Mhm,
they're doing for missions. They feel like God's calling them to missions,
mhm,
and they're in college, and um, so I was talking with one of them, and he on his summers would go to Europe and do some, like backpacking trips, and he's been doing that. It seems like a couple different summers now. So he has a group of contacts in Europe, and he's been keeping in touch with them over social media. And I met this kid, young man, I should say, like one time at this gathering that we spoke at, and just the other day he wrote me and he said, "Hey, do you guys know anybody in the Czech Republic? I shared my faith with a friend in the Czech, and he needs to find someone that
right?
can disciple him, someone that can invite him to church." And so it's cool to see how technology is allowing for that to
Exactly.
happen, but then the need for human contact, the need for connecting him with a human that's in his place
100%.
is also really
100%. Yeah,
important.
there's definitely downfalls of it. There's definitely, I mean, that's that's the key, right? Connecting them in with then a human real life community. I know that too, after COVID and things were digital, because of circumstances for so long, there's been a lot of people that haven't actually returned to in-person church and haven't returned to that
Hmm.
human connectivity, and that's, I think, critical and essential. We serve an incarnate God, a God that could have literally phoned it in, a God who could have telepathically made
Yeah,
himself
seriously.
known. And this God chose to show up in flesh and blood. And I think that it's that calls us back to that reality. Calls us back to, regardless of what age we're in. We serve an incarnate God, and it should be an incarnate faith.
No, that's true, and I think I think people are realizing that. I think there was, at least I'm hopeful that people are realizing that, and that this idea that you could just, do church from your couch is slowly, hopefully, going away, and people are realizing their need for being in connecting face to face in
That kind of
person.
connects
But
us to, I think, the other thing we wanted to talk about with, like, what is discipleship? And
yes,
discipleship, I think, coming out of an information age, um, I think we can be tempted to think, I'm discipled if I have all of the right knowledge about God, if my doctrine is squared away, if I understand cognitively the tenets of the faith, or if I am, teaching people in that, didactic way, if I'm teaching people to train them to know this is theology and this is truth, that is equating to discipleship. And yeah, is it?
yeah, that I think that's the because that was one of the main kind of takeaways that they had was like the answer to some of these issues was
Yeah,
discipleship.
that's what they identified as the
And
number one primary need for the advancement of the gospel is discipleship. Yeah.
yeah, and it's interesting to think of because I was, you know, I think most of us have been exposed to churches where they might call just their Sunday school program that they do Sunday mornings as their discipleship
Mm-hmm.
program,
Right.
or there might be a discipleship pastor who leads a men's breakfast and gets a woman to lead the women's prayer meetings or whatever, and they call it
Mm-hmm.
discipleship. But I don't know. You're our resident theologian. I don't know if this is just my own thinking but I feel like discipleship was more of a kind of like a hands-on training, like a more of like an apprenticeship type, like what we would call an
Mm-hmm.
apprenticeship now, or an internship of sorts where you're actually there,
Yeah.
you're doing it, and you're being kind of coached
Yeah.
along as you're trying to, accomplish something.
For sure.
Um,
Disciple literally means learner, which in our Western, you know, minds in this day and age, we can immediately think learner and it becomes scholastic. And so then we can translate that again into information. It's the transmission of information. And actually, if we think about, in the day of Christ, what a learner was, few people were literate. It really didn't have to do
mm,
with reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was learning a trade. It was, learning to
yeah.
be a carpenter, learning to be a fisherman. It was these things that were done together by doing. And even the rabbinic schools, the disciples of rabbis didn't just go to classes. They lived with them. They followed them around. They, copied what they did.
Yeah. And I think back to some of the earliest days as a believer, those were the things that were most impactful for me when I had different life decisions I was trying to make. I remember at one point I was thinking of dropping out of high school and going into the military and stuff. And I had, a brother in the faith who sat with me, and we were playing Risk, if you're familiar with the board game Risk. And it's
Oh,
a
yeah.
long game, and so we had plenty of
Oh,
time to
yeah.
talk, and he would talk through it with me, like, "Oh, so you're thinking about that. Have you thought of this other thing?" And so it was just kind of like, we weren't going through the Bible and memorizing verses or scripting, which is all good stuff. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
trying to say those aren't good things. But what really impacted me was the fact that he helped me reason and think about my
Same. Yeah.
decisions. And
Similar experiences. I remember when I was in university, I went to some Christmas event at my church and there was a woman speaker there. And I really was like, this was starting to sense this call on my life and this starting to believe that maybe God was going to ask me to teach and speak in front of other women. And I didn't know her at all. And I went up to her and asked her if she would, I used the word mentor, but she discipled me for the rest of my years of college. And she discipled me, yes, by she invited me to do Bible study fellowship with her. So to be accountable, to be studying the word and learning the word. But she wasn't, she discipled me by having me to her house every Friday for lunch. And she would just live life with me as we ate lunch and we'd talk about our lives and what kinds of things we were encountering and going through. And then as she had speaking engagements, she took me with her and I learned a bit of her, how she prepped and what she, thought about as she was preparing a message and how she structured them. And so it was really practical in a ministry aspect as well. And I can think of so many people who discipled me in how to be a mom, how to parent my kids, how to run our family finances, really practical things of of living like Christ.
what did that look
What
like?
did what look like?
Discipling in parenthood. Obviously, I'm a fairly new parent, so it's interesting to me
Yeah.
to hear, like,
So
you
I
know,
would say
that
I have
aspect.
a sister I have four sisters, but the one who is 7 years older than I am, she was, just that much ahead of me with raising kids and with having children that, her kids were always a phase ahead of mine. And so when I would just go spend time with my sister and her kids, and I would see how she would discipline them and what kind of boundaries she was setting and how she was discerning and discipling me in terms of things like, learning that not all kids needed the same rules because they have different weaknesses and different challenges. So if you just say, this is how this is in our household, well, that might serve one kid well, but maybe not another. So being discerning and
Mm,
meeting, your kids where they were. And so it was spending time with people who were just a little bit ahead of us on the same journey, right?
yeah.
Just a little bit ahead of us on the
Yeah,
same journey that could still relate to where I was and what I was going through, but had some experience under their belt and could at least model some things for me, give me some options for how they navigated it, or at least how they came to the decision of how they were going to navigate it. Right?
and what I'm hearing you say is also, like, the idea of discipleship. We have established, I think, that it's not one, just departing information to the next person, but then I think there's also a part of, like, actively observing and
Right.
so there is some teaching, some imparting of knowledge and whatnot, but then there's also just that
Right.
creating space so someone can observe you and see how you interact
Exactly.
and how you
Like, have
do
you
things.
ever just been, just socially, whether it's, at church or in a friend's house or out at a party or whatever, and you see maybe how a husband and wife are interacting, and you can think, gosh, I really like that. I like how they treat each other, or I like how they honor one another, or I'm impressed by that. When I've seen those things in my life, I've and really felt sort of a conviction that that was a growing edge for me, or a place where I needed some help. I've been really intentional in my life about saying, "Hey, could you mentor me or disciple me in this?" When we were called to
Mm,
the field, we had people who had been missionaries before that discipled us in the whole process of becoming cross-cultural workers, and kind of walked with us through their experience, sharing their experience and how they, followed God into that place and discerned things. And it doesn't mean we copycat them. I think the people that are really great
yeah.
at discipling us help us learn how they interacted with the Lord, and how they sought the Lord's will, and how they discerned the Lord's will in different types of circumstances, rather than saying, just point blank, here's what worked for me, you have to do it this way. And sometimes the advice is helpful.
Which,
Here's how we
yeah.
do a budget.
Yeah.
That's helpful for
Which
me. Yeah.
it's giving examples of how you solved or worked at figuring out how to handle something, but it's not prescribing that that's
Right.
the only way. Or so if the answer to some of the problems of the Great
Hmm.
Commission, like in moving forward, the Great Commission is discipleship. I think we really need to wrestle with, and I don't know that they did this very well. I need to maybe hear it fleshed out more, but like, what do they mean when they say discipleship? Because yeah, I think if it's not that kind of practical
Hmm.
hands-on learning, then we can get lost in it.
Well, I think the challenge with missionaries is we, but by nature of feeling called and having a burden, we have an agenda. And sometimes this agenda of evangelization or sharing the gospel, it can weigh on us in a way that's heavy and urgent, and that's not necessarily bad. But everything that we've talked about in terms of discipleship is slow life on life stuff. And so I think the
Mm,
temptation, or what and I don't know that this was happening in the report, and I have not read the whole report, and I've just looked at some of the results and the way they asked the questions, but there seemed to be, and again, it was a report on the Great Commission, such an emphasis even in discipleship and discipling people towards the Great Commission. I think we have to be careful, because the Great Commission should be the outgrowth or the result of healthy discipleship. But I don't think we can make it the goal. The goal has to be being transformed into the image of Christ. The goal has to be being wholehearted followers of Jesus, who are being changed by the Holy Spirit each day to look a little bit more like Him, and to desire to bring into the world the light and truth of who He is by how we're living and by how we're running our day to day lives. And that's a slow, long, hard process. Um, and if there was an emphasis, in my opinion, on the report in how are we discipling people, meaning how are we teaching people to share the gospel? I do think we need to be teaching people to share the gospel, but I think we need to be not only teaching people to share the gospel, but to know the God of the gospel, to know the Savior who is at the center of the gospel. And I think as we disciple people to that, we won't, the disciple said, we can't help but speak about what we have seen and heard. And the more people experience Christ, the more they know Christ, the more they grow in Christ, the more they'll just ooze Christ. But I think we can put the cart before the horse. And then we get into all of this, teaching people to share their faith, and teaching people these 5 steps to share the gospel, and teaching people these things. And they might be able to do all of that. But if their life doesn't look like Jesus, they're not the living evidence that God calls us to be of the power of the gospel. however, the inverse is true. If we're living like Christ, if my life is transformed, if I bring such a difference into the world that people can see it, smell it, taste it, um, they act like, one of the mottos of one of the churches I worked at was love people till they ask you why. Just love people until they ask you why. And I think if we just get into teaching, here's how you share your gospel, and we make this the goal, and that's what people attain to, and that's what people strive to. I'm going to share it. I'm going to share it. But their lives aren't reflecting forgiveness and kindness and freedom from anger and peace in troubled circumstances. Then people will think, well, I could cognitively assert to these 5 spiritual laws too, but if your life looks the same as mine, what's the point?
Yeah, as you're sharing, I was kind of thinking, I wonder, and I'm not sure, I haven't done any real research into this, but I wonder if we're kind of seeing terms being shifted around a little bit, like the vocabulary, because it used to be you talked about evangelism, and then discipleship was what came after someone,
Right?
uh,
Yep.
was evangelized or whatever. Now you hear less and less talk about evangelism and more talk about discipleship. But something that's been coming up on my radar from a few different people. One of the main guys that is John Mark Comer. Um, a lot of people are starting to talk more about spiritual formation, and it almost seems like, and I have not done a lot of research into it, but it almost seems like the spiritual formation guys are talking more about being like Jesus, being closer to God and in our spiritual walk. And it almost feels like that is kind of like what discipleship should have been, or should be, I guess, in a way. But it feels to me like discipleship is being, the word is kind of being hijacked to meaning kind of
Interesting.
evangelism. And so now this new movement is happening of focusing on
Right.
spiritual formation. I don't know. It's a hypothesis
Right.
that
Well,
I'm throwing
one
out
of
there.
the
But
ways they even phrased the question in this report was interesting to me. And again, I'm not judging them. It was an observation that I made that made me think, I wonder why they phrased the question that way. Was they asked, are people adequately discipled in the Great Commission mandate? I think what they mean by that is, are we discipling people to go into all the world and share the gospel, teaching them to obey everything, But are we supposed to disciple people in the Great Commission mandate? That was the question that I had to ask myself. And I think sure, but not only that. Like, that's just one piece
it's a part of it.
of it. And if we truncate what discipleship means to be teaching people to evangelize versus teaching people to obey everything that Jesus commanded and to be surrendered to the Holy Spirit and to confess their sin regularly and to repent and to be discerning in how we live and to be wise in how we engage the world and to be growing in our relationships and all of those things. Like, there's so much involved in it, and it's so whole life. And so I don't want to see the gospel reduced to I got this good news and I need to share it. I want it to be, I got this good news and it's rocked my world and I need to live it. And as I live it, one part of living it will be proclaiming it with my words. But every minute of every day, my living it should be proclaiming it with my life. And that's not possible if I'm not looking like Jesus.
There's a lot of good stuff in this report. I've enjoyed looking into it, and the website that they have up right now, you can click around and see the question and kind of see the information responding on the question. And you don't have to agree with everything. We didn't necessarily agree with everything, but it's helpful, and it's good things to get us thinking and being active. One of the things I found out as we are actually recording this is you cannot find a PDF or like the complete book of the report anywhere, but they do say this August 2024, they should have a
Excellent.
PDF of the full report to be released. So that would be great. It looks like they're just waiting on a couple of the sections to be published somewhere else before they release a PDF. So, but yes, Well,
Yeah.
this has been fun, Jen. It's been enjoyable looking at something different, and it gets me excited too for our next seasons as we tackle different topics. But even this, I think, it wasn't part of your dissertation, but even this talks to the idea of doing missions with, because it's shedding light on what's happening around the globe and reminding us that we're doing missions with a God who's global and who's working all across the world.
Amen.
Well, this has been episode 7 of Going, where God is at work. And we are so grateful for all of you. We want to encourage you. Please share, leave us a comment. If you're listening on the Spotify app, you can even leave us a voice message, a question, piece of feedback. We'll listen to that. Maybe we'll even include it as part of one of our podcasts. But until then, have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.